Hey everybody! In this video we're going to be talking about working with colored pencils and more specifically drawing hair. So I have my spread of colored pencils. I'm going to work with kind of just a generic kind of brownish color. Honestly, I'm just going to kind of test some swatches of a variety of these and see which ones are going to work best for me. So I'll take out a handful that I think might work and set them off to the side. We'll also want white. So to get started, I'm just going to sketch a little tendril of hair. So I'm going to focus on not thinking about individual strands of hair, but more about like the overall shapes that are being created. So kind of thinking of like larger curves, and that's going to kind of help create the indication of sort of like chunks of hair, if you will. So where do the tendrils kind of like clump together and how do they work together to create an overall sense of body? So I feel like that should be good to get me started. What I'm going to focus on then is blocking out some colors to start. So I'm going to start by making some swatches. So I know Sepia is going to be my darkest. I find it always really helpful to make swatches of your colors because sometimes the side of the color doesn't quite capture what it really looks like. So this is dark brown. Here we've got dark umber and chocolate. As I'm moving, I'm just going to slowly be getting lighter and probably a little warmer. Here we have light umber, burnt ochre, one of my favorites. I love that color. That's going to be more on the coppery side. Sienna Brown. And then the lightest one that I'm going to use here is ginger root. It's kind of a beige. Now, I don't think I'm going to use all of these colors, but I wanted to test them just to make sure that I like the ones that I choose to use. So I'm probably going to narrow out a few colors here that I don't think I'm going to use. Maybe they're a little too similar to each other or not quite the hue I'm looking for. Now when I'm working with hair, I want to not be thinking, again, same as when I sketched it, I don't want to be thinking about those individual strands right away. I want to be thinking about larger chunks of value. So I want to look like, where are my highlights, where are my shadows, and I think I might just kind of start in with my not quite darkest values, maybe like slightly less dark, and slowly build up to them. So what I'm going to do is find my darker shadows, and starting from where it's darkest, so like sort of the overlaps of things, I'm going to do kind of like these little flicking motions. So it's a little bit darker at the end and then it tapers off as it goes out. That's going to help me create a nice little gradient into the highlights. And I'm going to do the same down at the bottom here. Now again, you want to try and follow the shape of the tendril. So follow the direction that the hair is going. That's going to help it appear to have a little more volume. So I'm kind of like curving around this form just a little bit. Up here it's kind of more straight. And then I notice like in this section it's going to be an even darker area. So we think about like what's underneath is going to be darkest, what's protruding forward is going to be brighter. And now another thing to note is my colored pencil right now is not very sharp, so I'm not getting like super precise lines. I'm getting kind of softer lines, and that's working for me pretty well right now. However, as I move forward, I'm going to need to get a much sharper point to get more detailed. A few of these lines I might pull down a little bit further, just to have a little more variation in the values. Maybe there's some little chunks that are kind of sitting further back than other areas. Say this piece right here I think could be sitting pretty far underneath, so I'm going to have a nice deep shadow here. and fade it out as it moves away from where it's underneath the other section of hair. What's really important is that you're leaving space open for your highlights and your midtones. So honestly, I'm going to go darker than this, but I also want to make sure that I don't overdo it right away, because then I might not be able to build in my highlights and midtones as I want. So I'm using some restraint. I can always go darker. It's much harder to go lighter when we're working with colored pencils. So again, I'm curving around, so I'm like following the direction that the tendril of hair is moving in, and that's going to help create that sense of curvature, that twisting feeling as we're moving around. I am kind of cleaning up these edges by following along the other direction, but I don't want to do that too hard, otherwise it's going to look like an outline, and we don't want that because that will look fake. So that's not going to read as hair, that's going to read as a cartoon, right? So we need to be careful not to have hard outlines on anything. And then this last little tendril, it's going to fade out into that highlight and then get darker near the edge again. So I'm kind of like wiggling at the end and flicking. And that gives me this nice little tapering of value, softening the marks a little bit. I'll leave that off to the side to know that that's kind of what I started with. And then I think I'm going to move to my medium value and kind of go in between. So I'm just going to slowly build up my layers and then push inwards a little bit more. And now that I'm starting to layer these a little bit, I might be regretting my decision to get rid of some of those warmer colors. I think it might add a nice sort of sheen to it if I added a little bit of a warm color. So I think I might add in some of this Sienna Brown. I think that will kind of help give it a little bit more shine, a little more sheen to it, so it doesn't feel quite so blah. But I'm going to keep going with my light umber right now, and then I'll add that over the top. Think of it as like a glaze of color. I'm still leaving open spaces for my brighter highlights. Again, I don't want to fill that in right away because that will kind of lose a little bit of the volume if we do that. So even if I were drawing black hair, we would have like a similar technique. There's still going to be highlights in the black hair. There's still going to be like bright areas, depending on how the lighting is hitting it, obviously. And that's going to, you know, make it appear like it has volume to it. So if we completely draw it all with one color, or only dark values, only light values, it's going to look a little flat. And then I will take my lightest value, the ginger root, and I'm just going to kind of like very gently go in those lighter areas. I don't want to completely cover it because I do think there's still going to be some areas of white that I might want to pull out. But as you can see, we're starting to get a nice sense of volume going from like the shadows into the highlights. It's starting to appear more round, and the keys here are that we're layering our colors and we're creating these gradients, thinking about like what's underneath and what's protruding forward. That helps us create that sense of value as we're working. And I'm still not yet working with those individual hairs just yet, because I feel like I want to wait until I get my values in place first. So at this stage, I'm going to take my darkest values and I'm going to start pushing in those shadows even more. And that's what's really going to start to make this pop, is getting that contrast going. Again, I want to be careful not to push it too far into the tendril, otherwise we'll lose those highlights. But in the areas that are very far back in space, it's going to be a pretty nice deep shadow. And that's what's really going to help create that sense of volume. The contrast between the highlights and the shadows next to one another is really what we're looking for. That helps make it pop. And also having, you know, that difference between light and dark next to one another also creates a really nice sense of like hard edges and definition. which is what we're looking for here as we develop. It's really easy to get kind of lost in these curves and kind of forget where you're working, so close observation is helpful. The more you look at life, the more you pay attention to the things around you that you're drawing, the easier it gets, because you'll start to notice patterns and you'll start to see how things are put together. Another thing you'll want to watch out for when working with colored pencils is you don't want to build up the colored pencils too hard too fast. That creates something called burnishing. Now, burnishing can be really beneficial in a drawing. However, usually that is something you want to save until the very end. The point being is once an area is burnished, meaning when you look at it, it's really shiny. That's the wax of the colored pencils being built up. Once you've hit that point, it's usually the point of no return in a drawing. You're not really able to draw on top of it anymore. So it's kind of like the end point. There are a few ways to get around it. If that happens, you could take an X-Acto knife and kind of scrape off a layer, and this sometimes happens or is beneficial. There's also some fixatives you can use to kind of bring some tooth of your paper back if you need to, but they don't always work perfectly, right? So it's better to slowly build up your layers and just be kind of aware of how you are working rather than to just dig in really fast. Because not only do you build up the wax from the colored pencils, you're also kind of changing the texture of the paper. It flattens the tooth or the grip of the paper, and that makes it less likely to want to stick. So even if you were to scrape it off with a knife, the texture of the paper is still going to be kind of flattened and not quite as good. Alright, so I've got my darkest values in, and now I need to kind of go back in with those middle values, and we're just kind of doing a push and a pull until everything feels balanced. So I think at this point I'm going to use my warmer Sienna Brown and start to sharpen things. So a few tips for sharpening. It's always a good idea to hold your pencil really close to your sharpener so that you aren't wiggling it back and forth, because that creates some pressure points against the color and makes it more likely to break. So that's always a good tip. So I'm just going to lightly kind of glaze this warmer brown over the top of everything. And that really helps kind of perk things up a little bit. I'm going to really lightly do it over the highlights. I don't want to overdo it because I still need those highlights, but kind of warms things up a little bit. It's just a little too cool for my liking. I feel like adding this color really just kind of helped unify everything. It's kind of like bringing it all together just by having sort of that nice glaze of warmth over the top of everything. So as you can see, I've started to build up enough layers here that it's starting to kind of fill in. We're not really seeing as many gaps of white at this stage, which is good. So we're getting to the point where we might be close to burnishing, and what I can do now at this stage is start pulling out more of those individual strands, more of the brighter highlights. And to do this, I can use a very sharp colored pencil. I can use white to kind of help push and pull things. So I'm going to take my white and kind of push it into some of these highlights. And now as I'm doing that, the biggest change is that it's starting to burnish. So what I might also do is grab kind of another warmer color and toss it in this area as well to kind of help blend it even more, and then use my white just as a way to kind of blend my colors together. But I think I'm going to grab a yellow ochre. So I'm going to toss some of that yellow over those areas. So just like I did with the warmer brown, I'm kind of glazing over my highlights a little bit to warm it up a little. Give it that sort of sun-kissed glow, if you will. I'm going to just kind of alternate back and forth between my white and yellow and kind of play with that push and pull of values. So I don't want to rely too much on white for those highlights because I feel like it gets kind of flat and dull. So I like using those warmer hues to kind of smush it in just a little bit more. And now that I'm kind of putting these lighter hues over the top of the darker ones, I'm probably going to need to go back in with my shadows again just to like redefine them. And that's going to be something I do when I'm doing more of those sort of individual strands. So once I have a much sharper color pencil to work with. Alright, so I've sharpened up all of my pencils now, so I'm ready to start getting in those super fine areas. So I'm going to start with my darkest, so I'm going to work with the dark umber and just kind of like push in more of those individual strands into the shadows and just like really work those shadows in and pull them back from where they got a little too blended. And I'm not going to do too many like very obvious individual strands because I feel like that starts to look a little piecey and weird. So maybe there's just like a few areas where those individual pieces kind of stick out more. Doing that like kind of flicking motion to taper off my marks as I move up and with the shape of the hair. And this is where it really starts to, you know, get a sense of life to it once we start kind of pulling those individual strands into the piece. And, you know, maybe some of my individual strands are going to be these darker pieces. Mostly not, but I might just have a couple little wisps of darker strands coming out. I think they'll mostly be the medium values and lighter values, but to break up the tendril just a little bit helps make it appear more lifelike. Because nothing is that perfect, right? And every once in a while I might have like some singular hairs kind of breaking the mold in the interior of these spaces, and that's going to kind of help it again appear more natural. But you don't want to overdo it, otherwise it's going to start to look really scribbly and not as intentional. So I've done my darkest shadows. Now I'm going to go in with my kind of medium, warmer values and start pulling those individual strands in a little bit further. And this is the one where we're going to have a lot more like breaks of those individual hairs kind of like pulling outwards. So with these little breaks, it's super important to kind of be like decisive about them. Really short little marks, barely touching the paper. That's going to give you a better sense of like the hair kind of moving in and out of space without being too like super defined. Alright, so now that I've added those little flicks, I'm going to kind of go back in and pull out some more of those little individual warm strands in here. And we're slowly just making our way up the value trend here just to get some hints of each of those individual strands with the different values as we move our way up. I'm going to go kind of sparing with the yellow. I don't want it to be too overpowering. Just a few hints can warm things up a little bit. And there have been a few areas that I've really like intentionally left kind of open, and that's where I want to push in the highlights just a little bit more. Now if this is your first time drawing hair, I do want to just really emphasize this is hard. This is hard, and it's okay if it's hard. The more you do it, the more you practice, the easier it's going to get, the more natural it's going to feel. But really the key to doing this well is to just practice observing. The more you look at the world around you and look at objects as you're working, that's what's going to make it easier for you. So you gotta learn to see like an artist in order to be an artist, right? That's the goal. That's the struggle, right? So art is hard. That's kind of the moral of the story, but we want to revel in the challenge and learn from it. And then we're going to end up with something that you're really proud of. So hopefully you learned a little bit about drawing hair from this tutorial. I had fun doing it, so hopefully you do as well. Thanks for watching and keep creating.